All right, if you can all head right back to your seats, we're just about to get started. All right, it's lovely to see you all still so awake and engaged at this hour on a sort of dreary day out there. Although, isn't it nice? They've just redone the hotel. There's actual natural light in the conference room. This is so rare. There's actual natural light in in a hotel ballroom. It almost never happens. Oh. All right. So for our next conversation, which is focused on research and evaluation, we'll look at some of the strategies for research and evaluation on Head Start's two-generational efforts. We're joined again by Lynn Appelbaum from Educational Alliance and José Villarreal from AVANCE-Houston, as well as 3 leading researchers on 2Gen. To my right here, Lindsay Chase-Lansdale is the Francis Willard Professor of Human Development and Social Policy at the School of Education and Social Policy and Associate Provost for Faculty at Northwestern University. Her research addresses family, program, and policy strengths that lead to children's positive outcomes in the context of economic hardship. Lindsay is the recipient of the Society for Research on Adolescence Social Policy Award and the SRCD Award for Distinguished Contributions to Public Policy for Children. She was selected for the first cohort of the Aspen Institute's Ascend Fellowship, designed to bring together diverse leaders with breakthrough ideas and evidence to promote two-generation approaches towards educational success and economic security for low-income parents and children. Her collaborator, Terri, Sabol, is that right? Is an assistant professor in human development and social policy at the School of Education and Social Policy, and faculty associate at the Institute for Policy Research at Northwestern. She graduated from UVA with a PhD in applied developmental psychology. Her research focuses on early childhood education policy and practice, with a specific focus on how to measure and improve the quality of early childhood education programs in classrooms. And finally, we have Christopher King, who was a lecturer at the University of Texas at Austin's Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs, a name we all honor as we talk about Head Start, and a senior research scientist at the school's Ray Marshall Center, which he directed from 1991 to 2014. He's a labor economist with over 4 decades of experience researching and evaluating education, employment, and training policies and programs. He has written widely on education, workforce, and social policy, and is co-principal investigator with Lindsay on a rigorous multi-year evaluation of Career Advance, a program they'll tell you about shortly. And along with Lindsay, he was one of 20 leaders in the inaugural class of Ascend Fellows. I will turn you first to Lindsay and Terri.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting us to present to you. As a developmental psychologist interested in promoting the success of low-income families, I've been thinking about and studying two-generation programs for quite some time. And I just wanted to mention to you that the volume that Emily has made available, that's yellow and white, is a symbol of how important in the academic intersection with policy and programs two-generation perspectives have become. And in the opening chapter, which I wrote with Jean Brooks-Gunn, a fellow colleague at Columbia University, we highlighted programs that were emerging, much like the ones that have been spoken about today. And we wrote the paper about 2.5 years ago, and if I were to expand it, I would be adding all the programs that we heard about today. And meanwhile, we've been invited to write another chapter for a volume for scholars who are very interested in programs and policies for young children, and we will be featuring the programs we've heard about today. So just to give you a quick overview, and also to acknowledge our wonderful funders, we're going to talk about designing a research agenda, which many of you have talked about, and in particular our partnership with the Community Action Project of Tulsa, Oklahoma, which we fondly call CAP Tulsa, and the program Career Advance, which Christopher King designed in collaboration with CAP. I'm going to, since we have limited time, I'm going to skip my initial slides because we all know how important education is and how low the levels are of education of young children, as well as this slide shows that if you are in the bottom quintile of family income, only 11% of individuals have college education, whereas if you're in the top part of family income, 53%. So we know that this is a very important relationship. So as we've been talking today, I believe everybody has mentioned how important and emphasized the importance of linking education and employment with what children are getting in terms of early childhood education. And this is our definition. There are many types of two-generation programs, but today your presentations and your work have been music to our ears because we argue that you need to do these two-generation programs where the children are, as opposed to the history, say, of workforce with my dear colleague here, where we went where the adults were, and oh, by the way, there were children. So by starting with the platform of a center, and I know you live and breathe this every day, our approach has been, and our beliefs are, that parents have enormously high expectations for their children. These parents who have managed to get their children into Head Start have high hopes for their children, and often parents are saying, well, I lost my chance and I'm going to do everything for my child. And part of the two-gen that we're most excited about is understanding how these programs can harness parents' motivation for their children and have that cycle back to their own lives. Or as Andrea Levere says, who is a fellow and does children's savings accounts, parents will do for their children what they won't do for themselves. And if you can harness that, what happens? And that is our approach. So again, you've heard today, in the paper, and we've lived it since we're talking about 50 years of Head Start, Head Start has always been interested and devoted toward linking parents and children together. But as you can see in what we call two-generation programs 1.0, these were separate silos, there were referrals, and now in the 2.0 two-generation programs, as evinced by your presentations, everything is together, if not in the same building like at Alliance, at least with partnerships, the way many of the programs have been described today, so that the child services and programming are strongly linked with the parent programming. And, oops, where's my little arrow? There we go. So this is the research hypothesis that everyone has articulated, that we believe and we would like to test the idea that two-generation programs will have a greater impact on children than early childhood alone. And this is the core of our research program. We have what's called a change model, which will be very familiar to you, but I'd like to articulate what people have talked about. We have a long-term goal of family economic stability and these children being able to complete college themselves after their parents have, and have much more opportunities in life. Everyone also has mentioned, I think it was at Alliance, that then there are short, middle, and long-term goals. So our picture showing that if you add ECE, or basically build post-secondary education and workforce on the platform of Head Start, the short-term outcomes are what we know well for children: cognitive and social development, school readiness. For the parents, this can be arranged, but especially having them understand and define their goals, sign up for adult basic education, and have higher rates of education and career plans. For the midterm, again, we would argue that if outcomes are stronger for children, they're going to transition better. Someone talked about avoiding the fade out, have better success in elementary school, and parents will then have higher persistence in their own education, job training, get better skills, have higher rates of employment and financial stability. The long-term goals, this is what's so great about two-generation. It's investing for the future so that parents can actually oversee what their children are doing in school, and their children, parents will be better able to navigate high school and applying for college, getting training, and be role models for their children, leading to greater life stability for both. The last slide shows, well, what's going on along the whole time? And number one, I would really like to emphasize, in some of our early work, we found that parents are so devoted to their children that they're not connecting that if the parents get better education, their children will do better. And this is a very important concept that as people have been talking about the culture of their agencies changing, that is happening. Parents then convey higher expectations for children and what they can do. Their own parenting practices, we argue, could improve due to reduced stress, and their own physical and mental health could increase. There could also be the counter-argument that it's very hard to go to school, work, and raise a family, and that there could, in the short term, be higher stress. We might see some negative outcomes in the short term. So what evidence do we have? So the reason I'm saying the jury is still out is that I'm talking about the 30,000 feet level of research, where we have enormous samples from across the country, or different types of designs where you can have a control group or you randomly assign from a wait list parents who really want to be in the 2-gen program, but they're randomly assigned. The research that has been talked about today, the formative evaluations and the outcome research that has been talked about with each organization, is vital to the building of the evidence for a 2-generation movement. And we're now about to describe what Ron Haskins and Greg Margolis have called in their most recent book about the Obama administration, Show Me the Evidence, where they detail all of the excellent programs in the Obama administration that are based on evidence that programs work. So we have that at multiple levels. So this is the first slide here is from a study of the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth. It's about 2,000 mothers, and this investigator looked at the mothers who were low income, who had low levels of education, and then looked to see, well, if they went back to school on their own. This was not a 2-generation program. These are people interviewed by the Department of Labor over time. What happened to their children? So the purple group are mothers who went back to school when their children were between ages 6 and 8. And the line shows how the reading tests that children had went up. The yellow line is for mothers who went back to school when their children were between 6 and 10, and you can see there's still a positive relationship with how children are doing. And the green line is another reason why we're all here. These are mothers who did not go back to school, and their children's test score in reading stayed the same over this period of time. So I'm quickly going to go and acknowledge how important Head Start has been in terms of a 2-gen program, and I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir here that you know that most of the studies of Head Start have been on how are children doing. So Terri, Sabol, and I turned the question around and have a recent paper that asked, well, how does Head Start affect parents' education? And for this, we're very fortunate to draw on the Head Start Impact Study, where, as you know, approximately 3,500 families were randomly assigned to Head Start or a control group. So if parents were on the wait list and half of them got into Head Start when their children were 3 or 4, and the other half were said you need to go to programs in your community. And we know that there was positive impact of Head Start on children at the end of the program, and there's been fade out until 3rd grade, and I bet you anything when these children are young adults, we'll see positive impacts in the future. But what we did find is really symbolizes what's been going on today. Everything that you've been doing to promote parents' education shows that Head Start, as it's been running in the country from all different corners of the United States, improves parents' education over time. And as I was talking about the 30,000 feet level, we know this because these highly motivated families were randomly assigned to Head Start or not. So they're very similar in both groups. We're particularly excited to report that the effects were particularly strong for African American parents. They were much more likely than other groups to increase their education by the time from the time their children were age 3 to age 6, which I believe reflects the cultural emphasis that African American families place on education and how valuable it is, in addition to the fact that Head Start grew in the civil rights movement, in addition to the war on poverty. Also, parents with some college but no degree were the most likely to increase their education, and which we also think reflects the fact that it captured a group of people who have been trying, but now with the Head Start environment, which has created a trusting community, relationships, social capital that Ann mentioned is so key to the Ascend model, that within the context of the community that Head Start builds, this is the perfect opportunity for reaching out to parents to design the 2-generation programs. And now Terry's going to talk more specifically about a very intensive 2-gen program, Career Advance, and what's going on there.
Thanks.
You don't have to go anywhere, okay.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about our partnership with the Community Action Project of Tulsa County and their intentional two-generation model that uses Head Start as a platform to promote both their education and training and career development. So the Community Action Project of Tulsa County is an anti-poverty agency that's large. It serves 13 Head Start and Early Head Start centers and over 2,000 parents. And the idea behind Career Advance, their two-generation model, is to use Head Start as a platform and then create partnerships similar to those partnerships that have been discussed today to help explicitly support parents' educational advancement. So within Head Start, parents receive coaching from career coaches who are full-time dedicated to improving and supporting parents' education. Parents enter part of a cohort model, so they enter with 30 other parents whose children are also attending Head Start programs. In addition, all of their supports are aligned with helping parents create individual goal setting and career exploration, and also to help provide parents with incentives to offset the cost of going to school. So parents can receive about $300 a month that help them, that are sort of helping them, assuming that they meet certain attendance goals. They also receive bonuses once they get certificates, and they also get in-kind assistance in childcare for children who aren't attending the Head Start programs or if they've already advanced into elementary school for after-school care. So starting out, Career Advance had a very tight alignment with the healthcare sector, and this was based on Chris King's work in thinking about jobs that would actually lead to high-paying wages. And so what he created, and along with CAP, is a stackable training program in the healthcare sector where parents in a very quick amount of time could receive certificates and exit with those certificates. And then if they wanted to, they could re-enter and move up the career ladder. So in about 10 weeks, parents can receive a certified nursing assistant on up through a registered nurse, where you see parents can earn quite a bit of money at the end of that career ladder. So the program started out with this real specific and intentional alignment through the healthcare sector. And what CAP Tulsa realized after a couple of years is that although they were serving the parents who were sort of at the most career ready, they weren't well supporting the parents at the bottom end of the education distribution, so parents who came in with much lower levels of education or who were English language learners. So they were only serving a small fraction of the 2,000 parents, and they really had this broader two-generation mission to support parents across the education spectrum. So they changed their goal or realigned their goal to provide education, career coaching, and soft skill development for parents with a much wider range of educational goals and levels. So all the way on the right-hand side is the career-bound pathway, which is where those healthcare parents, so those parents who are ready to go on to community colleges and get those certificates and higher-level post-secondary degrees. On the left-hand side is where parents with the lower levels of education are, so parents who are either English language learners or who have a 6 to 8 year 8th grade education, and then moving on up to help and support parents progress towards their career goals. So the parents are still all parents across the levels are receiving career coaching, the peer support model, and incentives, but it's much more carefully tailored to help them where they are. So again, going back to what was spoken to this morning, meeting parents where they are, rather than where we think they should be. We've been very fortunate to have a research collaboration with them from its inception, starting with Chris King and adding on other members at Northwestern, Columbia, and New York University. And we've also been very fortunate to get federal funding to support these studies and intensive evaluations that are needed to understand both the implementation and effectiveness of Career Advance. So it started with funding from the Health Profession Opportunity Grant, which came from the workforce world, starting in 2011. And then we more recently got funding from Head Start for the Head Start University Partnership Grant to amp up our studies even more. So our first study was called the CAP Family Life Study, and it's still ongoing. And this was about 2 years after the program started. So there was intensive pilot staging, and we began a quasi-experimental study to look at both the implementation, doing focus groups and interviews, as well as an effectiveness study to look at both parent and child outcomes for multiple waves. The second study, once the program has continued to expand, so the first study was only of the healthcare sector. The second study for the CAP Family Advancement Study is much broader, looking at all of those career pathways, so parents who are ELL, moving on up through the career bound and through the healthcare sector. And this is a randomized controlled trial where we will randomize about 150 parents who are interested in the program to the program, and 150 are actually placed on a wait list for up to 2 years. So both of those studies are still ongoing. As Lindsay mentioned, it takes a long time to look at outcomes, particularly when you're looking at parents and children, and because of the cohort model, it also takes us a long time to get to our big enough sample sizes. But we do have very encouraging evidence when we just look at our career advanced parents who are in the healthcare sector in the cohort 4 through 7, so 92 parents. And what we see is that about 3/4 of our parents attain a certificate after 16 months. And these results really are remarkable when we look at the broader workforce development world in terms of both the community college numbers. We think it's about twice the number of what other workforce development programs have done in the past. In addition, we looked at persistence. And this is sort of an open question of, it might be a really good thing that parents are exiting and entering the workforce. And so we do see that about 2/3 of our parents stay in the program after 16 months. But encouragingly, among those who exit, we have a very high proportion of parents who are exiting with a certificate. And this is really exciting in the fact that this is the way the program was intended, that parents can leave with a certificate in a relatively short amount of time. We also have looked into what parts of the program parents, from their perspective, what they see as being the most supportive elements of the program. And through intensive interviews and focus groups, we've been able to draw on their voices to understand what their experiences are like. And one of the first things they talk about is the importance of the coordinated parent and child schedule and having classes that are actually offered while they're actually attending community college courses. In addition, they talk about the extraordinary peer support, which we're going to play the quote for that one, if it works.
Yeah. I know if I tried to leave this program, I would have some people on my phone. I know that, and that's the good thing about us being. That's the one good thing about us. About it being a small group of people. If one of us.
She's talking to somebody else.
All right. Oh, okay. Yeah, so maybe we'll go back. So I know if one of us tried to leave it, we're going to be on that phone quick. Wait a minute, what are you doing? So we know that they're really using each other as support to get through the program. In addition, parents are talking about the ways in which they're changing their interactions with their children.
I have found, on a positive note, what school has done in our house is, like, my 9-year-old has always struggled in math, and I've always struggled in math. It's never been a strong suit, and I've always told her that, sorry, I can't really help you, and she's relied on that. Well, mommy can't help.
Yeah, and the quote continues. Sorry. Can you, press play. It's like a 3-slide quote.
Well, when I got put in this math tutoring class, I felt like I could then relate to her more, and I felt like it was empowering me because it was giving me those skills that I left behind somewhere in high school and junior high. And so when I would get home, for the first couple
of weeks, I'd be like, I can't help you. And she's like, no, you can't. You don't know how to do this. And I was like, no, really, I know how to do it now.
So I feel like, one, I wasn't getting so upset with her because now I know the material and I understand it and I'm getting it. So it's helping her to feel better about herself than I feel better about myself, because for all these years it was embarrassing to tell your 9-year-old, sorry, I can't help you with this because I don't know it myself. Right. And now so I feel like that's been a positive, is that I can guide them better. Now that I have the information, I can help them.
So it's really exciting that we're seeing these great connections between parents and children and what their interactions look like at home. And then lastly, we also see role modeling in terms of educational expectations.
Kids will know, my son knows at 4 years old that he's not stopping his education after high school. He's going to keep going. And he knows that now, and he's, I think he's going to be much more prepared than I was when I was in high school.
So it's exciting again that we're having this alignment and expectations from preschool through post-secondary education. So when we think about future considerations, as it's been mentioned today, most of our participants in Career Advance are mothers, but we're really thinking carefully about how to better support fathers and get them involved, and having equivalent programming in intensity for both generations. And of course, we need more evidence on the effect on children, and that positive outcomes may take many years. So we're at the very early stages, but the time is ripe for innovation, experimentation, and evaluation in Head Start. Thanks.
All right, so my role is brief. I'm going to do a little bit of mop-up, but first I want to say how great it is to be here and how unexpected. 50 years ago, I was finishing high school, and so I may be one of the older ones in the room. I had no idea I would be back at the University of Texas teaching at the LBJ school. I had no idea I'd be working on Head Start 2 Gen with developmental psychologists. That's not what was in my plans, so you just never know. So I want to talk about three things. One is the early design, to pick up on some things that Terri showed you. Secondly, to talk a little bit about the implementation research, not the impact research. And then finally, a comment or two about scaling and sustaining these strategies. So that design with the house, right, nice little Head Start center. If you look at all of those pieces, I think it's important to recognize we were invited into Tulsa by George Kaiser and by the CAP leadership team. And George's comment to me, I will never forget. His comment was, and George heads up the foundation, a very wealthy guy, but invests a lot in Head Start programs in Tulsa and in all the things that are around it. But he said to us as we came up to pitch at his invitation, he said, look, I recognize that if the parents aren't doing better, the investments in the kids may not amount to much, so I need something, quote, to protect my investment in the kids, unquote. So he basically gave us the keys to the candy store and said, design something for me that will produce outcomes for the parents. So my team at the Ray Marshall Center went to the literature, so the components that you see in that little design of the Head Start Center, those are evidence-based components as well as we knew the evidence to that point. So building a sectoral career pathway model. And we have new evidence that I've been working on with the Aspen Institute and the Casey Foundation since that time. But the early evidence was pointing in the direction of that as a model, also providing great coaching, peer supports, a cohort model, the financial support for the parents, which was pegged at some of the research that we have from MDRC about and Greg Duncan, what it takes to basically help a parent vault their child up over time and kind of counteract whatever fate effects there are. So that program design was specifically connected in with the literature as we knew it. Now, I want to say something else about that model. There are different ways to do program designs, and many of you are kind of growing your own. This one is kind of a policy school's delight, right? So you design all the latest elements, bells and whistles, you put it in a model program. The next phase is you pilot that, which we did before I met Lindsay, and then you basically begin to demonstrate that it can work, so you begin building the evidence, and then once you've got an evidence base, as Ron Haskins tells us, well, then you basically take that out and try to sell it in the marketplace, because you need to sustain those pieces that work and also look at maybe scaling them beyond what we've already done. So that model is a great model that appeals to the rational economist in me, but I'll come back at the end and point out it may have some internal flaws that caused us grief later on. So let me turn to the evaluation, particularly the implementation part. So as we came into Tulsa back in 2008, 2009, and this is before we got the big support from HHS and the HPROG program and Kellogg, we knew we wanted to build in research as an integral part of the program. So we built in kind of tracking outcomes, not as extensively as we now do, but we also built in implementation research and explicitly wanted that to be of a continuous improvement sort. So we built in regular phone calls with the program staff and the research teams, which we continue to this day. So we get on the phone, we share what's latest in the programs, any recent findings that we have from the literature, from our research with them. We talk about problem solving. So it's been a very interactive, fluid kind of process, and really by design. So the pieces on the implementation side are basically we do site visits twice a year. We do elaborate interviews with not just the CAP program staff and the leadership, but with their partners, the community college people, Tulsa Tech, employers, the adult ed folks in town, human services, and so on. So it's a pretty elaborate process on the interview side. We also do in-depth focus groups, some of which you were seeing quotes from, to get a feeling from the participants themselves as to how it's going, and in some cases with the comparison group of parents who are not in the program to kind of get a feeling for what's going on for them. We also look at exit interview data that the program collects. We also look at other program documents. So all of that stuff goes into the Mixmaster and produces reports that look like this. And I should have brought some with me, and I didn't. But you can find them on the Ray Marshall Center website or on the CAP website, and maybe even other places as well. But it's a pretty good sense of what's been going on in the program. So takeaway messages from the implementation work, I would say really one I would stress. You heard the quotes just now. I would say that change model that Lindsay presented, those elements, we don't have impacts, right? It's too soon. But what we have are really good pointers from the interviews with program staff, from the focus groups, from talking to the partners, that the elements are basically working the way they were intended to work, which leads us to believe that if things keep working this way, our hope certainly is that that will produce the desired impacts for both parents and kids. All right, so again, the model seems to be holding up. The parts seem to be working, and I would say key parts, career coaching, the peer supports, which they clearly talk about, the role modeling, the financial supports, which they never fail to mention. And those are all critical pieces. And this stackable kind of, you can stop in, stop out kind of model where you're building towards something that's going to give family economic security when all is said and done. So we feel quite good about that. That said, this is a very fluid model. One of the conclusions in the report is that no cohort going through it, and now we're on cohort 11, no cohort has really experienced the same program, right? The career pathways have changed a bit. The career coaches have turned over. The program leadership has turned over. Our partners at Tulsa Community College have dropped the CNA program. So there's this constant adaptation, and without the implementation research, it would be hard to interpret the impacts that we're going to have for you hopefully soon. So it's a very kind of fluid thing that you've got to keep on top of. These pieces all come together to reinforce the kinds of findings that Terri talked about. We think we have something here. I think it also tells us something else, and that's that we've seen research that says simply referring people out to services in the community colleges, they're wonderful, but they don't provide all these pieces that we built into the program. We think that's really the persistence and completion story. Last thing to think about sustainability. Some of those key components, like the coaches, like the financial assistance, I look at that and I think, well, there's no specific existing funding source that's going to fund those things going forward. So a lot of our time these days talking with program staff is trying to figure that out. How do we sustain this going forward when, I mean, we are redeploying existing funding streams and, you know, blending and braiding and doing all those things, but we don't have a clear path to supporting this thing going forward. So anyway, I'll leave you with that kind of hanging thought. Thank you.
That's okay. So that was, there was no funding. So thank you, Chris. Just when I was excited to be at the big kids table with the researchers.
That's what economists do, you know, the wet blanket.
So thank you again for the opportunity to share the work at Education Alliance and for the opportunity to be on this panel. You heard this morning we had teaching strategies gold in place, so we knew how to measure child outcomes, and our kids were entering school ready to learn, and the 90th percentiles in all 7 domains. We had a fabulous community college partner. We had this great idea of you come to Educational Alliance, and we're going to help you and your child each graduate from college. We had a board member who got us to NYU's School of Education, and so we were ready, right? Impact evaluation time, 6 months in, we'd have this auspicious school telling us and the world how great our program was. That's what we thought. So that's my first lesson to you. We were wrong, right? You cannot have an impact evaluation on a brand new program with it. Look at the look, I made the researchers nod. So that we were very eager to have that. And I think some of that is driven by our desire as service providers to get end results quickly and show the world how much there is to be proud of about what the families we work with do. And some of that was driven by our funding sources with short windows, and right? So all of that, no, they all calmly say, takes time, you have to build the sample size, but that's the first lesson. Before you set out to show that a new initiative or a changed initiative has results, you've got to make sure you're actually doing what you said you were going to be doing. And that's what we came to learn was a formative evaluation. Let's first check and make sure that we are doing what we said we were doing. That is, my researchers friends have taught me to say that the program model has integrity. And so that's what, as opposed to just the program staff having integrity. So that NYU spent 2 years with us, also as our partners in our halls, in our classrooms, with us meeting with them, doing this formative evaluation that was going to document the implementation process of our new 2-generation program, to assess the feasibility of the program and give us feedback on how to make it better and on whether we were doing what we set out to do. So they looked at several different types of data. The systematic review of our program materials, what were we giving families, what were we giving funders, what were we giving anybody who would take materials from us, talking with key program staff and asking us separately the same questions, focus groups and interviews with current and former program participants at various levels of adult education, and those focus groups and conversations were in 3 different languages, in English, in Mandarin, and in Spanish. And then looking at the administrative data that we collect at Educational Alliance and at Borough Manhattan Community College. So they helped us develop a logic model, which I think many of you are familiar with, but is really a tool to map out what are you trying to do, how are you doing it, where are you trying to get, and what makes you think all of those things that you're doing will get you where you're trying to go. So as they did that with us, they helped us realize that we weren't entirely doing what we said we were setting out to do. We were in the long term, but we told, as Karen did this morning, the story of we were prompted to do this work largely by the notion of second-generation Head Start families. Right? And we were and are seeing some second-generation families, but we were also seeing a lot of families from the Fujian province, bless you, of China, who had been in New York for 17 minutes, and so it was hard for them to be second-generation Head Start families. And so they, both the NYU team and then at the peer learning sessions at Annie Casey that Kimberly mentioned, we had a lot of our friends say to us, you know, you guys are still focused on the same thing. You're still doing 2-generation work, and it's still about education, but you're not really serving a lot of people who are second-generation Head Start families or college-ready. And we kept kind of resisting that, even though we were also proudly talking about adding levels of ESOL instruction. So if it hadn't been for that outside that loving, partnering outside expertise, we wouldn't have realized that we are doing 2 tracks of the same thing. Our long-term goals are absolutely the same. We remain convinced that better educated parents will help kids be better educated and more successful in school, and their families be more economically secure. We have now come to accept that we are doing that in 2 tracks. A track that involves people who are English language learners and who are a long way from, although we are with them as long as they would like, from college, but who are learning, and an increasing number of families who are in college or almost in college. And that was what allowed us to say, wait, we need a separate college advisor and we need to deepen our ESOL programming. So I can't see that from there, but let's just assume it says. So the results are very encouraging, right? So people have been very positive about their experience. Marvin Hogan said before that the real joy comes from when people say things about your work. So I want to share one of the quotes from our partners at BMCC, at Borough Manhattan Community College, who, as you've heard, they are very much part of the program. But one of the ESOL teachers said, "A big strength of the program is that the Alliance has their expertise in social services. We're coming from BMCC, so we are bringing expertise in education. It's kind of the perfect marriage to be able to support the gamut of needs that a parent may have," right? So that's one of the things the formative evaluation found. Can somebody just advance? Thank you, Lindsay. So Karen mentioned before this quote, this finding, but as we were grappling with our 2 tracks, it was very helpful to have outside experts say to us, you know, even though you had your eyes set initially on Head Start parents going quickly to college, we're finding in our initial assessment that even in the very early stages of their education, parents are engaging in behaviors that are likely to impact their children's educational success. So that's reading to their children more, helping with homework more, talking with teachers more often. You guys do one other. So here are 2 of my favorite quotes. One is, "Before, I never read bedtime stories to my kids, and I never borrowed books from the library for them. Now the teachers tell us how to help our kids, and I read to my daughter for 30 minutes every day and play games with her." Right, so that's a home run. We are as excited about that as we are about the 3 parents in college. The other was, to me, the College Access and Success Program is definitely all in the name. So that was good. Our marketing, our 1-person marketing department liked that. It gives you access to your college. If you don't have a high school diploma or GED, they help you. They teach the parents that don't speak English. They help them learn English. I think that's a really big deal. So wait, thank you. Yes, Yasmina just said it is, which my notes say we do too, but that was, so, and we are now, as Kimberly mentioned, part of both continuing to work with NYU, who have worked with us and Annie Casey to make sure that the work they're doing with us intersects with the work that Casey is doing with James Bell Associates. And we are excited about being part of a broader evaluation that's looking at a cost study also. And if I could just, because I have the mic, the 2% cost is a small one and is a critical one. So I don't want any of us to leave this room or anybody to go to National Head Start or any other funder and think we can get started by ourselves, and with an additional investment, a modest additional investment with a high rate of return, we can make a difference. But without the additional investment, it's not good. I agree with Ann about what are you going to not do, but I also think it's about just a little more will make this huge difference, and that's part of our rallying cry, and I hope others will join in that rallying cry. So NYU is now helping us get ready for an actual impact evaluation, which means we still have random control trial things to figure out and sample sizes and other things, but first we just need school data, and so we're working with the City Department of Education to get a memorandum of understanding in place. They're helping us look at what it means to be very, very neighborhood-based. We serve 600 families a year. They all live in about a 1.5 mile square area. So that's the Lower East Side of New York, where, as I believe I mentioned, it is snowing. So, and a lot, yes. And public schools are closed tomorrow. And as a public service announcement for those of you tracking the New York City public school system. And they're also, NYU is also helping us look at how our theory of change is uniquely informed by the recent immigrant population that we're serving. They're very recent immigrants. So we hope to have the opportunity to tell you in large and small groups about the results of that work. But what I want to leave you with now is that evaluation. our lead person at NYU, said, "Tell them evaluation isn't scary." So, so I tell you that evaluation isn't scary, that these are really smart people who get our work, who want to help us do it better, and who want to make sure that we understand what we're doing it, why we're doing it, and what's resulting from it.
Thank you. Wasn't that great? Good. If I can have the clicker somewhere, and I think I'll figure out how to use it when he gets here, so we'll do it. So anyways, okay, real good. And first of all, I want to thank National Historic Association, Emily, Yasmina, for pulling this workshop, the conference together and the institute together. It's just, the timing is really, really good, and we've needed it. Timing is good because we need it now, but we've needed it for a long time. So I'm glad we're here. And I think one of the challenges in particularly putting this two-generation papers together is it's really a challenge to try to explain to someone what two-generation is or holistic approach is. An elevator speech, try to write it in a grant when the questions don't quite match what you want to say. Figure, how do I bridge over to the two-generation piece? And so I think the paper and the format you asked us to, you invited and that we worked on, kind of put a little more structure to what we're doing. And then I really like the information from the Ascend Institute, Aspen Institute. Really just the way you've laid it out, it's actually, it works really well in terms of being able to explain it to people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through some slides you saw this morning and kind of talk about some of the issues we have in terms of working with data and working with research. I think the issue you talked about integrity, the issue we deal with is fidelity. So that's another term for us. But luckily we do education data, you know, so it's education tracking, so that's kind of you get a little more room. But I'm going to go to, okay, AVANCE's mission is unlocking America's potential by strengthening families and at-risk communities. So it's always been families in two generations, and through effective parent education and support programs. So the support programs is part of also what says we got to lead them to self-sufficiency, and you know we have to work with our preschool programs. The strategic plan calls for children are school-ready and parents are self-sufficient. So the reason I planned is not to kind of bore you with another strategic plan, but it drives what we do. And so the biggest challenge to us when we came up with this priority from the strategic plan is how do we collect the information, how do we collect the data to be able to give us proof that we're actually meeting that particular priority. And so our MIS person, Luz Flores, is our deputy director, but she handles MIS, so that's her challenge. Luz, wave your hand in case you want to have a conversation with someone. So anyway, about MIS, so we're trying to figure out what is it that we need to collect to really be able to provide good data and to proof of what we do. One of the activities that comes out of that priority was the board in our strategic planning, the board kind of asked, can we come up with some return on investment formula? So, you know, how do we know we're having an impact? How do you measure that, and how can you show that? So listening to all the researchers on the evaluation and the impact evaluation research is music to my ears. I really want to listen to that and want to be able to see how we integrate that. So next slide. And what I mentioned to you earlier, the parent-child education program, it's always been two generations, and we have been tracking parent-child education program for a long time, trying to see where it goes. Again, you know, trying to find research dollars, it's very difficult for the community-based agency unless you're partnering with someone who has a research grant. We've done some measure of what happens to parents in parent-child education program, and we do know have some results. We do know the one that I do like is the graduation rate, because it shows that parents that are involved have a higher, have children whose graduation rate is running about 90%. Compared to the state, it's 67%. That's one separate study that was done, and it was done by IDRA. Chris, I think you're familiar with IDRA. So it's one way of measuring families over a 10-year period, and it was sort of done a year ago with 200 families in the study. So, and the reason we can confirm that the graduation rate is reliable is we use the Dallas AVANCE has been tracking their parent-child education program for a long time. But what they've been able to document is year to year to year, the attendance rate is always in the 97 and 98%. So if you're going to school every day, you know, your likelihood of graduation is going to be very high. And that's really kind of based on tracking data, and I think it's Title I tracking information. So at AVANCE, so in Houston, so this is separate cohorts. So I'm trying to figure out how do we connect the PCEP cohort to this group. So we're tracking our Head Start children. So this is children that went to Head Start, and we try to move children from PCE, Parent-Child Education Program, I'm going to call it PCEP, into Head Start, we can't necessarily identify them from at this point. So PCEP is a separate cohort. This is all our Head Start cohorts, and many of them have parents who have been through parent-child education program. They're in a career path through the ESL and through the GED. Some of the parents are actually transitioning to college because we're transitioning GED students to college. And you heard earlier the model presented by Antoinette. We're now starting with early Head Start, and we're trying to transition the mothers. These are mothers in high school who are in early Head Start, and they're, in our program, are transitioning to college. And so one aspect of this that you have to secure is agreement from the school districts to track your children. So HISD was the largest of the school districts. We serve about 5 school districts. So Houston Independent School District was the largest. So in the early Head Start, we run that in another school district. It's called Pasadena Independent School District. They've agreed to track the early Head Start parents and the early Head Start children. We don't, so these are very young, so the first cohort hasn't reached kindergarten yet, so they haven't been tested in kindergarten. We have aligned our curriculum to be able to match what the school uses, so that way at least we have some way of doing a basic assessment of when they leave our program, are they school ready, and how do they do when they get to the school district. So that was our math. I think I want to mention that only because we've been working on math. That was part of the strategic plan, the previous strategic plan, to offer quality programs, and we decided we were going to strengthen our math curriculum. So it's beginning to show, and I think in the last 2 years, our kindergarten children are actually scoring, they're showing the highest scores in the Stanford math exam. There's a mix. But in those cohorts, they're with other Head Start programs and with other HISD students, they're basically within the same standard. Except that when we looked at HISD, one of the things you have to do is we talked about segmenting your population. It applies when you're tracking early Head Start data and preschool, kindergarten, how they do in kindergarten. We're actually tracking several cohorts. It's the Head Start cohorts by grantee, so there's 4 of us. There is the Title I preschool programs, that preschool run by the school district, which in most cases is half-day preschool. There is children with no preschool. And to me, that's the best measure to see how well you do with Head Start is measure against children who don't have preschool and how they do in school. And obviously, those are the lowest performance scores that you'll find in the home measures. But one thing we'd like to add is be able to, and so the school district does want to come out and see what is it that's happening at AVANCE that's helping them keep their third grade advantage. In other words, not have experience in the fade out. So what we're going to push, again, is to say, we have the parent engagement, and the parent engagement is getting us to that point where, but we can't prove it. So unless we take the PCEP kids and make them a separate cohort, then we'll be able to measure them. And it's doable. I just have to convince the school district that it should be done. So that's like an administrator, right? Nothing. So I'm going to go through. So I talked about education. Tracking educational outcomes is what the school does, and it's really the measure that the school uses. So sometimes it doesn't meet the criteria for impact evaluation, but it's very useful data and very useful when you're working with school districts. So now what are we looking at from our MIS point of view? So we're trying to move parents to self-sufficiency. So now we're tracking other indicators of progress in self-sufficiency through our own internal system. So one of the things we're looking at is what do we have at the beginning of the school year when the parent comes to us, or at the beginning of when they come to us, and what do they have at the end of the year and at the end of their period with AVANCE, maybe 2 years and 3 years down the road. So we're looking at the number of parents on what kind of public assistance that they're on. I think the public assistance. So we're trying to measure whether or not, because one of your goals is if they should be on public assistance, you want to get them on public assistance, right? If it's healthcare, Medicaid, CHIPS, whatever the service may be, subsidized housing, because that's our job. On the other hand, the other part of our job is to move them out of poverty. So we're looking at a measure, is there a differential between when they start and when they leave, and have we reduced the amount of dependence on subsidized income, notwithstanding, and you move out of the population, the groups that you moved into financial assistance. So that's another measure. But so looking at educational attainment, where are they when they come to us, and where are they when they leave, and are they making progress towards those goals? So the MIS challenge right now is to get all the caseworkers, the family development workers, to kind of focus in on we mentioned this morning the ITP ITP, was it? Okay. And so the ITP is to be able to kind of figure out where are they going in terms of their own educational career. Are we making progress? And can we measure that as a total organizational impact on, when it's an outcome, and then can we measure impact, which is a longer term implications. So the big one is, where are they when it comes to us? For the business community and for workforce training, so we're trying to move our two-generation model to be able to incorporate workforce training more readily and make it more accessible to the parents of the Head Start children, the parents of any child that's in our parent-child program. And so what we're looking at, we're going to look at employment, and we're actually looking at it already. We've got the beginning. We did a base, sort of last year was sort of our pilot. This is our base year. So we're looking at grade levels. I'm sorry, this is employment. So looking at employment when they came to us at the beginning of the year. But what this chart shows, this is really interesting. So one measure that I think is very effective in terms of projecting the impact of Head Start data is that when a parent drops their child off with you, they're actually able to go to work. And so we've been able to show that consistently the last 2 years that we've been tracking this, that there's a 22% increase in employment. So we know that when they come to us, the employment rate and people earning income from employment is around 44 to 46%. And then at the end of the year, this is just within a 9-month period, after they drop your kids off with you, it is a 22% increase in employment. And I projected it out just, it's a very simple and rudimentary formula, but it equals to about $10 million a year in income for that year. For the 12-month income, it would be a $10 million figure. Just calculate $14 an hour to get that. But there are obviously, the researchers, I know, can find a better measure, a more accurate measure. So their job is to show integrity and fidelity. I'll just give them the data. So anyway. So the other one, because I think what's very important now and is really beyond looking at employment data is stability. So are they asset building? So in addition to housing, it's also savings accounts, and are people are they building capital to increase their value? So over and above beyond earned income. So we're also going to take a look at that and see the income, assets, and education. Who's going to college? Those are measures. I mean, we just know the number because it's a small number, and we know the number of families that are going from GED to college or from early Head Start to college. That's within a 30 to 40 number a year, for example. I'm assuming that housing would be the same thing. That a few families will be able to move through. We do add. There's a financial literacy curriculum that we use. It's in all the programs. So and it's done by volunteers. But how to apply for a loan for a mortgage is one of the subjects that they cover, as well as repair credit and checking accounts, et cetera. So those are the self-sufficiency slides. Just again, very just briefly, it's important to kind of segment and make sure you're measuring the right. At least you have the segments in the right, so you have cohorts, so that you're comparing apples to apples. Or if you're saying we're making more progress than the school is, you have to be able to define that in terms of their subgroups. And so anyway, that's kind of where we are. So I think the question for discussion is, particularly with the researchers, is really what kind of MIS database do you need to be able to start, moving in the direction of being able to have an impact evaluation. What we have is a collection of reports. There are different populations. So trying to tie, the impact of one program on the rest of the agency, it's a different set of data. So we're trying to kind of make that, reconcile that. But I think we're excited about, again, the two-generation model. We're excited about adding workforce programs into the mix because I think, again, the challenge is we've been at this for a long time. We have to move people out of poverty. That's kind of our mantra. Whether it's in your grant requirement or not, whether you measure the collection of all these programs, the collaboration of all these different resources of funds, have additional outcomes that are not necessarily part of each individual grant that's coming in. So that's important. And also, again, long-term, working with the board and others, we need to figure out how to measure return on investment, which is our long-term outcome. So that's kind of my presentation.
Sorry, I'm not on the mic. Did anyone have a question and couldn't hear me ask if you had a question? Okay. What I was going to pose to the group is that what we've heard from all of you is that you want to start early about thinking about research partnerships, whether you start right away with an actual study or not. Some folks in the room probably have research institutions or universities in their communities. Some people don't. If they're thinking about starting this kind of work and want to include researchers in that, where would you suggest that they go to start looking for those relationships, or how would they go about reaching out if they have someone nearby?
Lindsay thinks I should answer this. So here's what we did. We went to our board and we said, we do have the advantage of being in New York, right? So we're in a big city. But we went to our board, we all have boards, and we said we're looking for a connection to a university that could help us with this. And we had a board member who put us in touch with this group that once they got to know us was delighted to stay with us, but took the meeting because he said to, right? Like he was on their board, he was on our board, he took the, so I mean, I think there are academic institutions not horribly far from where almost all of us are. And I think most of us thinking from a social capital perspective know somebody who knows somebody there. So that's where I would say, just NYU taught us the following, which I love, definition of social capital, which is, so I know a guy. Right?
I love it. I would just add that Stephen Dow, who's the executive director of the Community Action Project of Tulsa, reads various articles. He was very concerned about attendance at the Head Start centers at CAP, and he read a research article by my collaborator, Jean Brooks-Gunn, who had just studied attendance, and so he emailed her, sort of cold emailed her, and she was very intrigued by the email, and she suggested that she and I talk with him on the phone, which we did. And then after we hung up, I called her back. I said, I've just talked with one of the most exciting people I've ever met. Let's take him up on his invitation to come visit CAP.
There's a lot of interest in research. I think someone mentioned earlier, the whole drive for equality, particularly in wage levels, so that's kind of an important piece. The other piece is in Head Start, and one of the issues in terms of if you want to consider the wait list your control group, it may not work so well. I know for us, because we consider the people on the wait list part of our population, so we try to get additional services to them also, and so we're going to keep fishing from that group. If they can't get into Head Start, we try to we kind of know what they're looking for. We also use that group as part of our, when we describe the population to be served, when we write other grants for workforce or whatever, we say we have our 2,500, 3,000 families that come to AVANCE every year. We have another, our wait list usually, it peaks at twice the number of people enrolled. So it's the 3,000 in this, there'll be about as many as 6,000 on the wait list at times. This is around April when everybody's trying to find something for their child. So I know you have that experience. So that's one. The other one is you incorporate particular leaders in research. There's a group in Houston that's associated with Rice University, which is the Kinder Institute. There are many other groups at University of Houston. And so you enroll them into your program. They either serve on the board, they serve on committees, these kind of other initiatives. So they they start to see what you have. You actually, I think a lot of us have a lot more data than we think we have, particularly if we use Promise. I know we use Promise, and there's a lot of data in there. And then the final thing I was going to say is the business community is interested. I know there's the Greater Houston Partnership, which is like the Chamber of Commerce, is their #1 legislative priority is supporting early childhood education and asking the state legislature to adopt early childhood education for all schools. But if we're involved with their network called Early Matters, and so that's my chance to send my data in. So I'm going to definitely send the 3rd grade, because as we were going through the task force, they quoted the 3rd grade fade out for Head Start. So now we have some data to kind of offset some of those arguments. But it will brand us in terms of having some good data, so good information. I know they don't want to call it data, but raw data.
Last comment.
So if I could make a pitch, the marriage of our research institutions has been an interesting one. So as I said, I never thought when I went into economics I'd be working with developmental psychologists, and I know Lindsay didn't think she'd be working with a labor economist, but
Come over to the light side.
that's right. we do have a dark reputation, but But the point is, if we're really serious about understanding two-generation programs and how they work, it's not just about developmental education and its effects for children. I mean, it goes even beyond what I do, which is kind of workforce education and training for adults and older youth, and what happens in the labor market, documenting earnings, employment, career advancement. I mean, there's even, neuroscience stuff that one of our other colleagues, Jack Shonkoff and Deborah Phillips, talk about. So there's lots of other aspects. So my main message is go looking for an interdisciplinary team, because you're going to need that expertise to really kind of flesh this thing out.
Great. All right, and with that, join me in thanking so much our second panel of the day.